SportsCenter is built by the Home Depot.
Hello there, welcome. Shay Cornett and Christine Williamson here, and as you know, we've got a lot to get to, including some crucial NBA playoff questions like, are the Lakers in trouble?
They might be, but what kept us both way too late last night was the NFL draft. And yes, the stories and excitement of who was taken last night, and then, of course, those who were not, because we are still all waiting on Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders to come off the board. And what has been, by far, the biggest surprise of this year's draft, Mel Kiper Jr.'s #1 overall rated quarterback, Shedeur Sanders, is still available. 5 QBs have come off the board. 102 picks have been made, and yet still, the Colorado quarterback has not heard his name called. Mel Kiper Jr. said he hasn't seen something like this in nearly 4 decades. But Shedeur Sanders was up early this morning, just before 8 a.m. Eastern, posted this to X, quote, "Another day, another opportunity to get a chance to play the game I love. Thank you, God. #legendary." What does our front office insider Mike Tannenbaum think of the whole situation there? Mike T, you're in Green Bay, so please enlighten me. What has happened? Because from my perspective at home, I just cannot wrap my head around what has gone down for the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft.
Shay, it's absolutely stunning. Shedeur Sanders is a really good quarterback by any measurement on the field. I had him at the bottom of the first round, right around where Jackson Dart went. And the fact that 102 picks have gone and he hasn't been picked is beyond incredible. Look, you heard some things that maybe the interviews at the Combine didn't go great. Well, let me tell you, over 20 years, that happens a lot. He's a good player, and I'm just surprised that some team doesn't see the value in. Now we're at a point where even as a backup, he would be tremendous value when, veteran quarterbacks are getting $10 million a year. So I got to think he's going to come off the board somewhere here in the 4th round. And as Mel Kiper said earlier, Shay, you think about Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, they went in the 4th round. So for Shedeur, this is going to be the beginning of the story, not the end of it, but I certainly expect that he'll get drafted soon.
Mike T, can I ask you a GM question here? Do you think there's a chance, and I don't know, you've been in a draft room before, I have not, where maybe other GMs, other head coaches, other brass of teams are seeing other teams pass on him, and maybe there's a scared factor here? I don't understand.
Shay, it's a very fair question. I go back to 2016. The #1 player on our board was Laramie Tunsil. He had a bump in the road with a video, and we're looking around like, we can't believe other teams are passing up on Laramie Tunsil. He's a great person. So we relied on our process, our preparation. But absolutely, when you're in the draft room now, you're looking to your left and your right, and you're saying, how in the world are 5 quarterbacks drafted without Shedeur? You're probably speaking to some friends, but candidly, what good teams are doing now, they're speaking to Shedeur. They're talking to him last night. They're talking to him this morning and seeing what's going on. Maybe, he can explain some things. Maybe there's lessons he's learned. So you're still trying to collect more information, but you're making a very fair point. There isn't an increased level of skepticism because of where we are in the draft.
Okay, well, now we're just under an hour until the final day of the draft gets underway. Where could you see Shedeur Sanders ultimately landing at this point?
Shay, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Look, maybe they have an agreement in principle with Aaron Rodgers, but I am hard-pressed to think that such a good organization would give up $30 million a year to DK Metcalf and a 2nd-round pick to have Skylar Thompson or Mason Rudolph throw him the ball. You think about Russell Wilson left, Justin Fields left. I got to think when they're in the 3rd round and it's the 83rd pick and they take Caleb Johnson and not a quarterback, especially Shedeur Sanders, I'm just hard-pressed to think that the Steelers and Shedeur Sanders are not an ideal fit. They have a pick coming up here in the 4th round. We're going to find out soon, but I don't know. It just all lines up for me to see him in Pittsburgh.
And to be fair, the Pittsburgh Steelers did not have a pick in the 2nd round, so they've only taken 2 players thus far, and as you said, they have a pick coming up in the 4th. You can hear more of Mike T's NFL draft analysis at noon Eastern on ESPN Radio. Mike T, as always, appreciate you.
Thanks, Shay.
Welcome back to SportsCenter, built by the Home Depot.
Jay and Christine with you. Day 2 of the NFL Draft. NFC North teams went offense. The division averaged the most points per game last season, and last night those teams loaded up even more with 10 of 12 picks being on the offensive side. 3 more quarterbacks were taken on day 2 of the NFL Draft. Tyler Shuck out of Louisville was the first off the board to the Saints, followed by Jalen Milroe to Seattle, and Dylan Gabriel went to the Browns. But the name that we all thought we'd heard early on Thursday was still waiting to hear on Saturday. Shedeur Sanders still undrafted after 3 rounds, with every team passing on him multiple times so far. Joining us from Green Bay is our NFL draft analyst, Jordan Reed. So there are 155 total picks to be announced at Lambeau. Where do you see Shedeur Sanders?
Yeah, well, 2 teams that definitely come to mind. The first one is the Pittsburgh Steelers at number 123 overall. I look at a team that right now has Mason Rudolph penciled in as their starting quarterback. There's no way you can go into the season as Mason Rudolph as your starter. Why not add Shedeur Sanders to the room, somebody that is supremely accurate, and he could step in as the starter. I think he's even better than Mason Rudolph even walking through the door. Another team is the LA Rams at 127. They made the big trade on night 1 as they slid back with exchanging picks with Atlanta to get 2 second-round picks in 2026. I like the situation with McVay, and then also not forced to play right away behind Matthew Stafford.
That all makes sense, but it's still crazy that you just said 123. Shedeur Sanders right next to that. It's crazy that those teams already passed on him. Okay, in addition to Shedeur, there are still some gems waiting to hear their names called. Give me some names and fits that you see making the most sense during day 3.
Yeah, Christine, day 3 is always my favorite day of the draft just because that's where we find these hidden gems. But there's 3 that I really like today, and the team fits that I think they fit best on. The first one is wide receiver Jalen Royals out of Utah State to the Tennessee Titans. They have already selected Cam Ward with the number 1 overall pick. Now let's go ahead and get him a weapon. Jalen Royals is one of the best run-after-catch receivers in this year's draft. You have to remember, he had 800 yards prior to the injury that he suffered after 7 games this season. So I like the addition of Jalen Royals to the Tennessee Titans. The next one is Braden Swinson, the defensive end out of LSU to the Chicago Bears. They still have a huge problem as far as rushing off of the edge. They had some free agent additions this offseason. Dayo Odeyingbo is one that definitely comes to mind as far as how important he's going to be. But Braden Swinson, 8.5 sacks this past season. I think he's a great fit on the Chicago Bears. And then lastly, Dylan Sampson to the 49ers. One fit that I think fits perfect in that outside zone run scheme. The SEC offensive player of this past season. The 49ers historically have targeted running backs in the 3rd and the 4th round. Here we are in the backfield. I really like this fit in Kyle Shanahan's system.
All right, the SEC's offensive player finished with 22 rush touchdowns last season, 5th most in conference history. You can hear more of Jordan's NFL draft analyst at noon Eastern on ESPN Radio. Jordan, thank you.
What about the associate?
We're getting closer to kickoff day 3 of the NFL draft. That's coming up right here on ESPN. But first, our NFL draft insider, Field Yates, joins us from Green Bay to help recap the highs and the lows of rounds 1 through 3. Field, most teams, they've made at least 3 selections so far. So in your eyes, who has impressed you the most with the draft that they've put together so far?
Yeah, Christine, I like the work that the Las Vegas Raiders have done through 2 days, with plenty more work for them to do later on this afternoon here in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And last night we saw this team wheel and deal quite a bit as they moved back from early on in the 2nd round. Ended up landing Jack Besh, one of my top 50 prospects in the entire draft class. He went 58th overall. Of course, Ashton Genty led the way at number 6 overall. And then in the 3rd round, they added a pair of players in Darian Porter and Charles Grant, who both have very high ceilings. Grant, a impressive William & Mary offensive tackle, is going to get there in some time. He needs some seasoning. Meanwhile, Darian Porter, 6'3" corner, 200 pounds with 4.30 speed. He was a former wide receiver at Iowa State who has elite ball skills. 2 guys who in time can become key contributors for them. And then Caleb Rogers, to me, more of a ready-made, plug-and-play interior offensive lineman after playing both tackle spots during his collegiate career at Texas Tech. A little bit of work left for them to do, though, today. I would like to see the team take advantage of the great defensive tackle depth that we have in this year's draft class. I thought that Mason Graham, number 6 overall, could be amongst the names they would consider if he had gotten there. Instead, they went with Ashton Genty. No surprise there, but some of the defensive tackles that we'll be considering today include Joshua Farmer from Florida State, Ty Robinson from Nebraska, and J.J. Pegues from Ole Miss, who, by the way, had 7 rushing touchdowns last year for